Now, data-driven innovation has the potential to address some of the society's most pressing challenges, health, education, government, like we discussed. So what are some of the most promising opportunities do you see?
Yeah. I mean, so education, I think, is one of the most important, and I think one of the most exciting opportunities. We don't have personalized education in the United States, especially in the public school system. And what I mean by that is, everyone learns at different rates. Everyone comes to education with different skills and abilities, different interests.
Hello, I'm Hanh Brown. Welcome to AI 50, where your data meets innovation. At AI 50, we skillfully deploy cutting-edge AI technology to create large language model apps. These apps are tailored specifically for the needs and preferences of the 50 plus demographic. Our team of experts works diligently to understand the unique requirements and interests of this age group. And by leveraging the power of AI, we develop solutions that cater to their specific needs. We believe that technology should be accessible to everyone, regardless of age. So our goal is to empower the 50 plus demographic with tools that enhance their daily lives and keep them connected to the world around them. So today's topic is data-driven policy and innovation with AI, where we'll go into the intersection of data, technology, and public policy. So our special guest today is Daniel Castro. He's the director of the Center for Data Innovation, a leading think tank studying how data and technology create new opportunities for people and businesses. Daniel's work focuses on the impact of emerging technologies and helping policymakers develop rules supporting responsible innovation. So Daniel bridges the gap between policymakers, tech companies, and the public to help everyone understand the benefits and challenges of AI and data analytics. He champions responsible innovation, believing new technologies should benefit society while addressing potential risks. So, in our discussion, Daniel will share his unique perspective on data driven innovation and the future of technology policy. We'll explore his groundbreaking work at the Center for Data Innovation and his insights on fostering a responsible, inclusive future. So, Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. So, I'm from Michigan, and where are you calling from?
I'm calling from North Carolina in Winston-Salem.
Okay, nice, nice. I know we talked a little bit before the show. We're seeing some great weather here, so I think we both can relate to the same all the activities that's going on right now. So I thank you so much for your time. So to start things off, could you share with us something about yourself that many people might not know? It could be a unique experience or a hidden talent or an interesting fact that us understand what has shaped your journey and perspective.
Yeah, it's a great question. I wish I had more hidden talents or talents in general. A unique fact about me is I'm both an American and I'm Colombian. My father was Colombian, so I grew up in a dual national household. I think having a global perspective on issues, especially around technology and innovation, is something that's really useful because you have to realize that there's more than one way of understanding how a technology is going to be used. Different countries have different perspectives on these issues. Different demographics have different perspectives on these issues. And I think having that experience of growing up in a household, multicultural household, gives you new experiences and new ways of looking at things that is useful whenever you're confronted with new ideas. Sometimes you know that you should challenge those ideas and you should challenge conventional wisdom because you've seen it challenged in your own life.
hmm Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So, your work at the Center for Data Innovation is deeply rooted in advocating for data driven innovation and shaping public policy. So, can you share with us how your personal journey, your values, and beliefs have influenced your approach to these critical issues?
Yeah. So, I grew up as someone who loved technology from the earliest ages. I was excited when we got our first computer in the household. I, enjoyed programming as a child, even before it was kind of cooler to be a software engineer to do programming, right? The way it is now, I think much more kind of respected as a profession. And so, I always saw technology as something that was useful and beneficial for the world, and something that was good. And I think that has shaped a lot of the way I look at technology and technology policy, and where I interact with this, because I understand that one, deeply understanding technology helps you understand how policy impacts the opportunities there. So if you have a very superficial knowledge of what technology can do, both its potential and its limitations, you can't create effective laws and regulations around it. And so, seeing technology and innovation as a force for good, I think changes the way we encounter all the new innovations that we see in the world. If you look at it as a force for good, when you see these changes, you're generally optimistic about what it means. It doesn't mean you have to be naive about recognizing that there could be trade-offs and there can be challenges, but generally recognizing that historically technology has been a force for good. Whether we're talking about the printing press, gas lighting, and heating, railroads, automobiles, the internet, computers today, and now AI. These technologies had just a tremendously positive impact. The Industrial Revolution, and think about what it meant for the average life of workers, and what their standard of living became. And obviously, there were major challenges with improving workers' rights that we went through throughout history. But if you look at this trajectory, it's been positive. So when I think about kind of when I approach new technologies, that's one of the biggest issues I'm looking at is this continuing to be a force for good? And we have a deep history of recognizing it. When it comes to data, though, I'd say the other part of this is I think that the famous maxim, "You can't manage what you can't measure," is really
Hmm.
important, and data really starts empowering us to make smarter decisions, better decisions, faster decisions, and just whether it's in our individual lives, deciding things like wearing a smart watch or a Fitbit, and figuring out, okay, I'm going to exercise differently because I see this information, or eat differently, or improve my health, using data at the city level to better manage a municipality or deliver services to citizens, or at the organizational level, where we're talking about companies that are really innovative because they can do more with data. I think that concept of you can't manage what you can't measure is hugely important, and undercuts a lot of how I look at policy as well.
Hmm. Great insight. And what a great time right now to convey that message, right? With AI and the speed of advancement and the hype, the fear, and those are very real, but there's also opportunities for embracing innovation. So
Yeah.
that's great. So now, throughout your career, you've navigated some complex landscape of data policy and technological advancements. So
Mhm.
what have been some of the most valuable lessons that you've learned along the way?
Well, I think one is that progress is really hard. That there's so many barriers to innovation, and that the point at which a technology or innovation, the potential is realized. You can see how it would be beneficial, and then the point where it's actually widely deployed in the world, and generating those benefits, there's often a huge gap there. I think it's easy to look at some technologies, smartphones, for example, and we see this rapid adoption cycle. I think a lot of people who study innovation technology, they might be familiar with the S curve of innovation, right? It starts kind of slow, and then it rapidly accelerates, and goes up quickly. And we've seen that kind of curve be compressed over time. So if you think about something like radio, what it took to go from 0% to a nearly full 100% adoption, right? That was maybe 40 years. Television, a little bit more compressed. Computers, it gets a little shorter, and then you get to something like smartphones, and you're talking about only a few years, right? It gets so much smaller. Then you have things like AI, where you had ChatGPT, if you look at that as an app, one of the shortest adoption cycles in history of only a few months, where you had, millions of 100 million users. That, that makes it, I think, look to the average person that change is happening so much faster now. And in some areas, some of these, very consumer oriented places where we're just talking about adopting software, yes, change happens fast. When we talk about some of these, bigger areas of life, think about healthcare being transformed to be more digital. That takes decades, right? We've been investing billions of dollars in the United States, for example, just to get hospitals and primary care physicians to use electronic health records. The technology has been around since the 80s, and we were just talking about basically computers and digital records. But actually doing this so that it's useful for the patient, so that people's data is protected, so that providers have an incentive to adopt it and deploy it effectively and responsibly to make sure it doesn't interfere with quality of care. All of those things has taken a tremendous amount of time. And now that we even are rolling it out, now they're focused on, okay, now that the technology is there, how do we make sure that we're using it effectively to do things like reduce adverse medical events? How do we make sure that, for example, when a doctor is giving a prescription, if it's going to interact with another prescription, that's identified automatically by the computer. And that when alerts are being sent to the doctors, we're not sending too many alerts, so they just dismiss them, getting to that whole usability side of technology. So, the lesson here, again, is just, that progress can be so hard. It takes, I think, a lot longer than we expected and expect in most cases. So many people, I think, predicted self-driving cars by 2020. It's 2024. We do have, some self-driving cars on the road in very limited deployment, but we're still a long way from actually getting it fully out there. I think that's the lesson that we have to learn here.
I agree. I feel like when AI first came out for the general population, there was a lot of hype. There was not a full understanding, and the speed of change was daily. And not all of it was, in my mind, AI, so to speak, right?
Right.
But now, 2024, I think people are in execution mode. And as you execute, everything that you're describing, privacy, security, transparency, are huge. And in my mind, in order to do that successfully, obviously data is the heart of it. But you also want to cultivate an AI ecosystem, because without that, you're really not reaping the benefits of AI.
That's right. And I think one of the things that's so important is when we look at these innovations, I mean, ChatGPT was released as a proof of concept more than anything, right? It wasn't released originally as, here's a service everyone should subscribe to. It was really just showing, the potential, Dolly, similar thing, to do image generation. And so, it's one of those areas where it's easy to be a critic, right? It's easy to go in and look at basically a beta product and say, look at all the ways it can be used badly or all the mistakes it makes.
Mhm.
And it's true, and it's kind of fun, and there's something, I think, just innately human in us, kind of poking holes at new ideas, and being somewhat skeptical. But there's also so many positive examples of how it's useful and how it's an improvement. And I think it's important that we both, put on that critical, lens and look and say, okay, how do we make sure that as we're widely deploying this, we address those risks, but also recognize that, we need to not just make sure things don't go wrong, but also make sure things go right. How do we actually make sure that technology advances and is used widely for the beneficial purposes that are possibly out there?
I agree with you. Conversations like this, in my mind, it puts it out there for others to be a part of that conversation, right? Because everybody's concerns are very legit, and they need to hear conversations like this to ensure that, hey, it's adaptation, there's change, there's lifelong learning, there's evolution, and that comes with kind of a, rattle your current scenario. So you really have to step out of that and adapt this lifelong learning in the age of AI. Because I don't know how you're going to effectively live without it now.
That's right. I mean, it is increasingly integrated into our lives. If you have a phone, it will be automatically deployed. If you have a computer or a web browser, if you're using, Microsoft Office or any of these apps, it will be part of us. And I think one of the interesting things is, where AI is so beneficial is how it can allow us to, interact with devices and information in an entirely natural way. It's
Mm-hmm.
conversational now. When we talk about, before it was always, we have to teach people all these digital skills, and really what that
Mm-hmm.
meant was teach them to figure out how to work with the computer instead of teaching the computer how to work with humans, right?
Exactly
And
right.
so now anyone who can speak, who can sign, who can, just express an emotion through their face or body language, can communicate with these AI enabled systems. And I think that opens up so many possibilities for so many people, who might otherwise never really be able to sit down at a computer and maybe do research the way that people who are fully abled or who have certain capabilities can do. Maybe you're not literate and you want to interact with this. AI is just reducing so many barriers to, I think,
Mm-hmm.
creativity and jobs and interactivity, and I think that's amazing.
You're spot on. It really democratizes, it levels the playing field. I don't care where you are in the world, you now
Mhm.
have access. I call it enterprise, even, right? Small businesses, whether it's 10 people to 10,000 people, you really have access to the same tools.
That's right.
And for people, let's say, that's near and dear, for me, it's like older adults, the language barrier, the, let's say, disabilities and so forth. So now there's ways that you can have a conversation with your phone, your chat application. And all of this is due to the recent GPT-4o recent release, multimodal integration with their APIs and so forth. So it's exciting times, it really levels the playing field for everybody, all age,
That's
right?
right. That's
Yeah.
right. And there's not that learning curve that I think, we had before,
Mm-hmm.
where, you had to kind of wait your turn, right? Because you had to have
Mm-hmm.
people coming and showing you. So many of the people that are adopting this technology now, they didn't have anyone teach it. They just tried
Right.
it. And once they tried it, they realized they didn't really need a teacher. They could
Mm-hmm.
learn just by exploring. So I
Mm-hmm.
think one of the really interesting things here is that, anyone who's curious about this can really start now. There's no barrier to starting to use some of these technologies today for many people.
I echo that. So, at the Center for Data Innovation, it's been involved in many projects and initiatives. So, can you share a story of one that you're particularly proud of and why it holds significance for you?
Yeah. So one of our early projects was thinking about open data. I started the center around 2014, I guess 2012. And so one of the questions we had was, President Obama had created on his one of his first executive orders was around opening up government, having more transparency in government, having government be more digital and work for citizens. But it was an executive order. And our question that we kind of posed originally was, might President Obama be the last open government, open data president? And how can we make sure that doesn't happen? How can we make sure that this idea, which started with this administration and had bipartisan support, was fully institutionalized? And so we looked at what would it take to really move forward and take that executive order and turn it into legislation. And through numerous conversations on the Hill with many companies who are doing really interesting work around open data, academics, nonprofits, we worked together with a whole coalition to build up, I think, broad support for what became the Open Government Data Act, which became passed law, actually signed by President Trump. Many years later. So you think about the time it takes from ideas. Let's take this idea and really formally codify this in law and getting it to something that has now been implemented. And now agencies have this responsibility of publishing their enterprise data sets. So they say these are all the data sets we have. They are making, there's now standards around making them available. We have chief data officers who are focused on making this data available. And there's just been so much thought into thinking through how government agencies at the federal level, create value through their data and make sure that it's put to useful purpose. And now we've seen that idea, of course, at the state and local level as well. We've seen many businesses embrace open data. And I think it's something that's really useful and valuable. And we're also seeing, I think, this spirit reflected in all the innovation around AI. As you mentioned, AI is strong and useful when it can be trained on large data sets. And a lot of this data is coming from government. And there's just huge opportunities to continue to make progress in this space. So that's an area, that we started initial work on. And I'm delighted to see that it kind of made its way all the way through. And, hope to see in the future other ideas like this where, there's just so much that I think government can do hand in hand with industry and academia and nonprofits to advance, opportunities to leverage data and to make, data-driven decisions.
Awesome initiative. Now, one of the key challenges in promoting data-driven innovation is balancing its potential benefits with the need to address public concerns and mitigate risk. So, how do you approach this delicate balance in your work?
So I think the most important thing is not to let fear dominate. I think some people are probably familiar with the Gartner hype cycle for new technologies, where at the beginning you have a technology come out and not many people know about it, and it kind of reaches this kind of peak where you hear a lot of claims that maybe aren't true, and then finally they call it the trough of disillusionment, and then things kind of level out, right? And so there's a lot of technologies that I think are overhyped. On the kind of the counter side to that is what I would say there's a technology panic cycle as well, where at the early stages of technology, first there's just a few adopters who are kind of the innovators and they're excited about it, but at some point, the fears about a new technology outpace understanding of it. And I think we see that happen again and again with many new technologies. And we actually have done some reports looking historically at various technologies and how they went through these cycles. Even things that, now we look back on, motor vehicles. They had these red flag laws where some jurisdictions said, because cars are so dangerous, the solution is going to be before you drive a car, you just have someone walking in front of the car waving a red flag. That's not a scalable solution, right? Imagine if every vehicle had someone walking in front of it waving a flag. There were concerns about the printing press, and when we started moving from the printing press to pulp fiction books, people were saying, well, do we really want anyone to be able to publish their ideas? Do we want anyone to have access to pamphlets? What would the kind of pulp fiction books do to the minds of youth? They're going to be reading just these pure sci-fi and fiction things instead of the esteemed historic English writers, for example. So we've seen so many of the same fears. Fears about children, fears about impact on society, fears about the harmful effects. People were concerned about when gas was used for lighting, the noxious fumes in people's homes and what that would do to their health. All of these same fears that we have about technology, radio waves in our brain and what that might impact. Some very similar things. And so I think it's really important that we don't let fear dominate. It's also important that we be guided by evidence. So, the point isn't to say that, some technology might not be harmful or some technology might not have problems. It can, and we should always investigate that and look at that with an open mind. But we can't be motivated primarily by fear, because when we see fear being the dominant emotion, we tend to end up with bad laws and regulations that hold us back. And in this case, particularly I think around AI, there's just so much opportunity and promise. We don't want to see that held back. We don't want to see the opportunities to use AI to find a new medical cure held back by 10 years for someone who needs that. We don't want to see AI that can be used to address loneliness or provide opportunities for people to age in place. We don't want to see that delayed by 10 years because that will affect so many, people who could use those benefits now. And so I think we have to, continue to iterate and evolve and track risk and challenges, but not let the perfect be the enemy of the good in these cases. Look at opportunities where the technology is often not perfect, but maybe it's better than what we have today. And so, use that as the metric for deciding when we move forward and when we slow things down.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that what you said. Don't let fear dominate, because let's say if we do, we not we might not be driving cars or flying right now. We'll be using horse buggies and so forth. So we really need to adapt innovation, with enthusiasm and caution. And I think the key is be a part of the conversation, and learn and grow and entrust in AI. And I always recommend for folks when trying to use AI is that start small, something that perhaps it's so repetitive, such a nuisance that they would just love to not deal with. So start small and gain confidence, and then you can go further from that.
That's a really great suggestion, and I wholeheartedly agree. I think there's these opportunities to use AI to do something that you also don't like to do, right? And
Hmm.
that's one of those things where if you use it for in ways that make your life better, you know,
Hmm.
that's it's a win. It's always going to be a win. One of
I
the things
think
I
so.
use it for is I don't uh, I like to have help writing messages to people to
Hmm.
make sure I phrase things,
Hmm.
kindly, appropriately. And I love using the technology to just quickly, instantaneously
Hmm.
run through an email and say, "Is this the best way to say this?" And you get that answer, and it's incredibly useful.
Hmm. And I think what AI has helped me, for instance, like I would ask it a couple questions, but what it uncovered for me is a whole wealth of knowledge that I didn't even know what to ask. Do you
Mm.
you know what I mean by that?
Yeah,
So it really it doesn't cause you to become lazy or dependent on it. What it does for me, at least, it improves my critical thinking that I didn't have before.
right.
So I think it's wonderful. So now, as a leader in the field of data policy, I'm sure there are times that you had to navigate challenges to build trust. Perhaps somebody that didn't trust you, the policy, or the data that you were using, and you had to take an unpopular stance on an issue.
Yeah.
So, can you discuss a situation like that where you face this type of challenge, and what did you do? How did you approach it?
Yeah, so there was, I think, early on, especially when I was focused on data policy and data-driven innovation, and at the time, this wasn't something that many people were thinking about. This is kind of pre the data science boom and big data boom, and whenever people would want to talk about data, they want to talk about privacy. And one of the important points that I was trying to emphasize is that we need to go beyond the privacy conversation around policy around data. We need to be thinking about not only, yes, how do we protect data, but also, are we collecting enough data? Is there more data that we should be collecting? Is there better data that we could be collecting? Who's being left out of the data collection? How are we making sure that the data is used well? And also, really emphasizing this point that in many cases, there are trade-offs between privacy and innovation. And that is something that a lot of people who are advocating for privacy did not want to acknowledge, did not want to, have that part of the debate because nobody wants to be against innovation. They weren't necessarily against innovation; they were just for privacy. And just I would freely admit that sometimes being pro innovation means there's trade-offs with privacy, and I'm kind of saying you might get less privacy. But that was a very unpopular opinion because it was, in some ways I was making the argument that effectively some groups were against innovation. And so, I think what's important there is that in this debate, in this conversation about where policy should go on these technologies, we get really clear on what it is exactly that we want. Because in many cases, people were pro privacy, but they're also pro healthcare, right? They're also pro education. And so, what I think should be able to agree on is that if the goal is, for example, to improve education, public education, through data analytics, through better understanding of how students learn. Um, that should be the goal. And we should focus very practically on how do we get there.
Hmm.
And,
And it's not one or the other, right? You don't have to
exactly,
choose one or the other. You can collaborate with all key stakeholders, like what you're doing, to achieve a common goal. So it's another attitude shift, as
that's
opposed
right.
to something that's so absolute. Well, perhaps it isn't in this case. Perhaps it's more of a a shift of paradigm shift so that you can move towards a goal that you can still have privacy and achieve your health goals and education goals and so forth.
And recognize that, at the end of the day, many people have different values and choices, and we can't pick just one for everyone. You want to give people as much choice as possible. Some people, for example, when they have a rare disease, they opt in to sharing their data as much as
Mhm.
possible because they want to see any progress that can be made in that area. People with, children that have childhood diseases, chronic diseases, they want to see that progress. They're willing to make those trade-offs. In other cases, there might be a non-serious medical condition that is very private that somebody doesn't want to share. And that sharing looks different. And so I think we have to recognize that giving people as much choice and opportunity is really important. And there's not a one size fits all solution. And it doesn't,
Right.
people are usually very unhappy when, whether it's an advocacy group or the government or a company saying, this is the way you must handle data. Give people more choice. And then we get more
Mhm.
options for everyone.
Optionality, and it's personal, right? And
That's
what I
right.
hear is, um, and nowadays with the advancements of AI, you can do all that. You don't have to choose one or the other. You can achieve privacy, transparency, um, and achieve your health goals, whether you are a practitioner or a hospital. So,
Mhm.
yep. Now, in your work, I'm sure you collaborate with many folks, stakeholders like policymakers, industry leaders, and academics to drive progress in the data privacy. So, how do you foster these connections and facilitate productive conversations? Because they have conflicting goals, for instance.
That's right. I think it's in most policy, it's a debate, right? It's a debate of facts and evidence and persuasion. Sometimes it's a debate about values and goals. And I think the first stop is figuring out what are you actually debating? Are you debating your values and goals, or are you debating the evidence and facts? And so, that's I think the first step. And then you figure out, do we have common interests? And how can we work together on many of these areas? And I think that's why there's a lot of talk always in the news about divided government and the partisan government. But when you look at so much of the legislation that comes out of Congress around tech policy, around data policy, it is very bipartisan. We see stakeholders from all sides come together and say, yes, we want to use data to advance healthcare. Yes, we want to collect better data around the census. Yes, we want to have better data about even global warming and climate change because it affects our coastal communities, and that is, the coast affects everyone, red states, blue states, and so I think there's so much work in this space that it really truly is bipartisan, and so I think just focusing on, again, where can data have a positive impact? How can data be
Mhm.
used for good? There's a lot of interest and collaboration across the board.
So true. Now, data driven innovation um, has a potential to address some of the society's most pressing challenges: health, education, government, like we discussed. So, what are some of the most promising opportunities do you see?
Yeah. I mean, so education, I think, is one of the most important, and I think one of the most exciting opportunities. We don't have personalized education in the United States, especially in the public school system. And what I mean by that is, everyone learns at different rates. Everyone comes to education with different skills and abilities, different interests. And, I think back to when I was in school, you had a large classroom. Um, you had one teacher, and they were teaching to the middle, right? They were teaching to kind of the average student in the class. If you were ahead, you were probably a little bored. If you were behind, you were probably a little confused. And those differences get bigger and bigger every year. And that's a problem. And so with AI and data, I think we have so many opportunities to deliver the type of education that each person needs. If somebody's, going faster on math, great, let them zip ahead. They will learn more, they will stay engaged, and they will enjoy school because they're being
Mhm.
challenged and they have these opportunities. If somebody's doing great in reading and language arts, allow them to accelerate in those areas. And then the areas where people need more work, that's where the educators can spend more time doing one-on-one work with them, doing enrichment. And also, I mean, that's at the individual level. Then you think about, at the school level and just how we manage schools and just the need for better data to figure out, okay, are there problems going on at the school? Are there health issues going on at the school? Where are the buses? Just logistics that, data can help with that. And then you start thinking kind of bigger picture, what kind of, all these different school systems have various types of interventions, whether it's, drug interventions, gangs, special STEM programs. The question's always, are those programs effective? And the only way to know that is by looking over time. Usually, sometimes it's, 5 to 10 years and seeing, okay, where have these students ended up in the workforce? How are they doing? Are they thriving in society? And you have to have good data to do that. You have to have not only these kind of educational systems, these longitudinal data systems that are about the schools, you also have to have it about the workforce. And so many states have started to build these. They didn't build them so they were interoperable. They didn't build them to really track this over time. And that's one thing that I think we're starting to think about. I think that's a huge opportunity to really improve our workforce and our students and how we learn.
Absolutely. I think the education system needs to have a course, AI integration. If you can pick up a phone, if you have a computer, a laptop, and if you start integrating your day-to-day usage of this, that student or that school system needs to have a dedicated course in teaching students how to integrate, how to use it wisely, as opposed to seeing it as cheating, right?
That's right.
There's nothing wrong with growing, developing, opening your mind. If you are ahead, that's great. But let's say if you're behind, well, here is a tool that you can utilize offline, outside of the classroom, and so forth. So the attitude ought to be embraced as an enhancement, augmentation, as opposed to like, you're so bad for using it, you must be cheating, you know?
Exactly. And I just think about, these tools that, as you mentioned, the new release of ChatGPT, it's multimodal, it can see things. Think about a student that's struggling with, how do I solve this math problem? You
Mhm.
can point your phone at it, and now you have a personal tutor that, students didn't
Speaks
have
to you.
access to. This speaks to you.
Mhm.
This is across income levels, as long as people have access to a phone. That's just incredibly powerful, but we have to figure out, how do we actually get this widely deployed so students know how to use it, as you said, that they're trained on the appropriate ways to use it. So
Right.
it's augmenting their education. So it's
Mhm.
helping them learn better. It's not just a kind of a cheat code for getting through school where they're not actually learning. You want to make sure
Yeah.
that they're actually using it to get a better education. And I think that possibility is certainly there.
Hmm. And that's going to take a huge paradigm shift for the administrators, the superintendents to create a dedicated course on AI and how
Right.
that needs to be integrated in the school and home life. But they intersect, right? Um, because I still hear, my kids are not, they're graduate from college and so forth, but like I still hear from, elementary, middle, and high school, it's still a bad thing. It's perceived to be cheating, so you kind of have to hide it.
That's right. And that needs to change. And I think those perceptions will change, and some of it will be generational, because at some point, many of these students, they're going to be using this at home. They're going to be using this, instead of Google for search. And
Yes.
so there's not going to be a way of kind of taking it away from them.
Hmm. So data technology is constantly evolving. So how do you stay informed, and how do the Center of Data Innovation remains at the forefront of the developments?
A lot of reading and a lot of talking to experts. I think that's one of the most important things in technology, is that you actually understand, as I said, kind of deeply how these things work. I remember when I was working on blockchain, for example, I had to go in and really, deeply look at, okay, how exactly, are these algorithms working? What goes into it? The same with machine learning and AI. You have to study the algorithms. It's not enough to know kind of vaguely, this is how it's working. You need to understand really what's happening under the hood, I think, to make effective policy. Now, not everyone needs to do that, but for the work that we do in policy, I think we have to have that strong connection. And I think Congress is getting better at this too. There's been a number of fellows that have been placed through AAAS, the American Academy for Science, that has brought in AI experts and placed them in congressional offices so that as some of these policymakers are thinking about legislation, they have someone in-house who is an actual computer scientist who can provide them that expertise so that as they're writing policy, it actually maps to where the technology is today.
Very true. So the Center of Data Innovation produced numerous reports over the years. Can you share an example of one that you believe has had a particularly significant impact on shaping data and policy?
Yeah, so one of our earlier reports was on what we call data poverty or the data divide. And this is a concept that I think has gotten a lot more recognition, especially in the age of AI, where people are concerned about bias. But basically, we made the argument that for many individuals and groups, the biggest problem for them is not that too much data is being collected about them, which would be kind of the privacy concern, but that too little data is being collected about them. And for that reason, they might be left behind as we see data-driven innovation advancing. And so, for example, you can think about healthcare, for example, where certain populations aren't included traditionally in medical research. They're not the core representatives in clinical trials, for example. You can think about many areas where there are data gaps, where, for example, maybe a wealthy neighborhood has air quality sensors and a poor neighborhood doesn't. And so, when you can use an app to figure out whether or not you should go bicycling. If you're in the wealthy neighborhood, you can do that. If you're in the poor neighborhood, you can't. There's so many areas like that where there's these data divides. And conceptually, we've had this long tradition in the United States and globally of thinking about the digital divide, where people didn't have access to the internet or computers or digital literacy. And the argument that we've made is that there's also this data divide, and that it's something that we should recognize and address through policy to help close that gap. And it's something that I think has increasingly gotten attention. We've seen a lot of work focused at the global level in trying to collect data from all parts of the world, thinking about things like language gaps in data sets, thinking about how well represented different groups are in data sets. The Census Bureau has been rethinking, for example, its different demographic categories. We've seen new thinking in terms of surveys the government does to make sure that, for example, in long-term care facilities, are they asking good questions to figure out that there might be unique differences between older adults, that it's not just are you older, but maybe what languages do you speak? What's your relationship status? What's your sexuality? Questions that impact the types of services that government agencies or nonprofits wanted to deliver. So just thinking through those data questions, it's hugely important. And so I think that report and some of the subsequent ones we've done on that topic have had a lot of impact on this conversation.
That's a great initiative. Now, data policy issues often transcend borders and require a global perspective. So, how do you maintain this broader view while also addressing regional and local concerns?
Yeah, so you're right. I mean, so much of data is global. And one of the points we've made in a recent report is that with big data, especially, these larger and larger data sets, it's no longer possible to just expect one organization, one company, one country to collect all the data about a particular topic. That was really the old model of thinking. It used to be, if you want, you have, World Health Organization or something, maybe they're going to collect all the data on malaria, right? We're moving to a world where there are going to be lots of different partners that have data. And what we need to be thinking about is how do we build global data infrastructure so that data collected, in South Africa and Iran and Colombia and the United States and Australia, they're collecting data about the same topic, the same theme, that data is interoperable, that's in a similar data format, and that it can be shared, and that we have these, federated data networks. And that's a policy problem, it's a technology problem, it's a data standards problem, it's a skills problem. And it's really hard to think about how do you bring all that data governance together. But that's what we have to be thinking about, how data transcends borders, and that for it to be useful and valuable, it should transcend borders, that we don't want data localized, we don't want it restricted on where it can be used, we want it to be global. So that's, I think that's one of the most important issues that we work on. We do a lot of work on kind of cross-border data flows, thinking about data as part of trade policy as well. So just lots of opportunities to to really push policymakers to think about data in new ways.
Hmm. Well, thank you so much. We covered so many points. So we're at the tail end. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
We covered a lot. I just want to say thank you for this conversation. It's, I think, so important that we have, so much of this technology available to everyone, because the benefits are things that I'm very optimistic about, and I think have great potential.
I echo that. Well, thank you for joining us in this insightful discussion on data-driven policy and innovation with AI. So today's talk has shed light on the crucial role that data and technology play in shaping our society and driving progress. So throughout our conversation, we explored the fascinating intersection of data, AI, and policy and public policy. We went into the challenges and opportunities that arise when leveraging these powerful tools for societal benefit. Our discussion highlighted the need for ethical innovation in AI and data analytics. So, as we create and use these technologies, we must focus on being clear, responsible, and beneficial to people and society. And today's insights have shown us that the amazing possibilities of data-driven innovation, and that we can use AI and data to solve huge problems, boost economic development, and enhance people's well-being in significant ways. So we hope that this conversation has motivated you to reflect on the impact of data and AI in our future. So I encourage you to keep learning about this exciting field and participating in discussions like this so that we can advance and improve and make change and good change for the future. So thank you for being a part of this enlightening discussion, and keep innovating and striving towards a better, more data-driven world. Thank you for your attention.